Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 9 of What If Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the world leader. If you guys enjoy this what if, and want to see part 10 of it, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. At a civilian's pace, the trek from Konoha to Kumo would take maybe 3 weeks, give or take, barring any bandit attacks or bad weather. For a ninja it would take anywhere from 4 days to a week. A caravan of merchants, travelers, and ninjas were heading to Kumo for the Chunin exams. 20 genin teams along with their jonin sensei was more than enough protection for 50 civilians. The carts full of goods went along the center of the road, surrounded by ninjas, occasionally sending out scouts to observe the road ahead. Being about a week into the trip, most of the shinobi and kunoichi were restless, more used to jumping through the trees and sprinting along the roads than walking at what was considered a sedate pace. Tenten, as part of Section 2, the group watching the middle of the caravan, was bored. However, she was also smart, and while walking, read through a scroll describing a Doten technique, Earth Wall encampment. While she wanted to be known as the weapon mistress of Konoha, the name would give away her weaknesses, her reliance on weapons. And while Tenten did love her weapons, she knew that a shinobi did not specialize, not unless they could compensate for it. She didn't have a massive chakra capacity, or perfect control, which left all but the roughest techniques out of her reach. That knowledge didn't faze her. Her idol, Tsunade Senju, wasn't known as the strongest kunoichi for just her prodigious strength. She was also one of the greatest medical minds in the elemental nations. Thankfully, Doten techniques were the very definition of rough jutsu. Kaiten and Raiten used chakra to create the elements, which were then used to attack, while Futen, Suiten, and Doten manipulated existing elements, air, water and earth. Doten jutsu were far easier to learn compared to the others, which was why it wasn't surprising that almost every ninja knew at least one. Earth, dirt, rock, and mud was solid and only needed to chakra to let and hold shape. Water needed to be shaped and directed carefully, or it would fail, and simply become puddles. Air needed to be gathered, directed and shaped, or it would end up as a weak breeze instead of a hurricane. So, Doten was perfect for Tenten. Anyone who knew her was aware that she took being a ninja seriously. Her new outfit made sure that even strangers knew. Light boots replaced sandals. Her light green pants were darkened, and held multiple pockets and light armoring on the thighs. Her pink shirt had been replaced with a long-sleeved shirt with leather padding on the stomach and the shoulders. Black leather gloves and light bracers covered her arms. The gloves were open in the front. She tried to use full gloves, but the difference in feel threw her aim off. The sword was strapped to her back. This weapon had previously belonged to Naruto, but he had forged a new weapon, one that made her salivate at the thought of it. Flashback. So, I want you to stand back, and don't interrupt me during this. It could be very dangerous for all of us. Naruto finished explaining, his serious gaze pinning Tenten and her father in place until they nodded in agreement. Alright, stand back, he said, pulling his jacket off and hanging up outside of the forge. Naruto began to work the bellows, after lighting the fire, bringing it to a heat that would barely redden metal. Tenten and Tenteki traded dubious looks, but kept silent. The Dragon Man poured magic into his palm, gathering a swirling vortex of purple and red energy that pulsed with deep beat. He squeezed the vortex gently, creating a larger version in front of him with the sound of a gong being struck. Out of the vortex stepped a humanoid figure clad in only a loincloth, holding a shoddily made warhammer. It was covered in scars, with red skin and black markings that seemed to be demonic in nature. Quickly, Naruto stepped forward, drawing his ebon dagger with a soul-chilling hiss emanating from the blade, and plunged the weapon held deep up into the creature's throat, piercing its brain and killing it instantly. A small thunderclap echoed through the room as white and purple energy streamed off of the dead creature, drawn to a crystal structure Naruto held in his free hand. He pocketed the crystal and knelt, using his hands to rip open the creature's chest, splashing glowing blood onto the floor as he tore the heart out. Setting the bright red organ aside, Naruto hefted the creature onto his shoulders and tossed it into the forge. Instantly, the heat shot up, drawing sweat from the two humans as the air became stifling. Naruto placed 3 ingots of ebony metal into the forge, began to rhythmically breathe dragon fire over them. Within seconds, the metal was glowing white hot and beginning to melt. Quickly he snatched it out of the forge and set it on the anvil, hammering away while chanting under his breath. For about an hour he labored away, shaping the metal into a blade. Naruto stepped away to grab an empty trough, revealing a plain red-hot blade. He breathed fire over it again and grabbed the heart, holding over the trough. He squeezed like one would a fruit, and glowing red blood poured from the organ, more than it should hold, filling the trough more than halfway. Naruto opened his hand, showing the two a small black stone that pulsed weakly with red. He heated the sword again, and pushed the stone into the center of the blade, folding the metal to cover it, before flicking it off the anvil, and into the trough. Tenten and her father stepped forward as the blood hissed and steamed angrily. What? Naruto shushed her and pointed at the receding liquid. The trio watched as the blood slowly drained away, and the outline of his sword became apparent. Once it was all gone, Naruto reached in and withdrew the weapon, holding it up to look over it for imperfections. The pommel was sharp, like an arrowhead, with black leather wrapped around the hilt. The guard was hooked to cover the hand in a gnarled black color that made up the center of the blade. The edges were gray and wickedly sharp with serrations running the entire length of the blade, and the sword had red lines running through it that pulsed gently. All in all, it was a vicious-looking blade, made for killing and maiming. With a hilt a little less than a foot long and 3.5 foot edge, the weapon was just less than 5 feet long. "This is what's called a bastard sword," Naruto commented, swinging the blade slowly. Halfway between a long sword and a broadsword, it can wield it with 2 hands for extra power, or in one hand with another weapon, or a shield in the other. He suddenly twirled the blade, shearing off the tip of the anvil horn with shing. The cut was clean, and the blade undamaged. There were only a few weapons more powerful than this. Naruto leaned the blade against the wall, and pulled a scroll out of his jacket. He unsealed a stone table that was covered in runic carvings, and laid the Daedra bastard sword over it, withdrawing the glowing gem. "This is called an enchanting table," Naruto explained to the 2 humans. "With a filled soul gem, you can enchant weapons and armor with different effects. As far as I know, this is the last of its kind." He laid a hand on blade, making sure to touch the table as his eyes glazed over. The gem in his hand disintegrated, flowing over the blade and beginning to glow red. "I just enchanted it to do fire damage," Naruto said, showing them the small flame-like designs covering the edge. Tenten and her father were silent until the older blacksmith suddenly spoke. "Son, if I were gay, I'd kiss you." And Tenten fingered the ring on her middle finger. It was a simple silver band with a ruby set into it that Naruto enchanted to create a ward around her that would deflect damage, along with another enchantment that would muffle the sounds she made. On a completely unrelated note, she discovered that sneaking up on people was a lot of fun. The brunette sighed and ran through the hand seals slowly. "This is so boring." Naruto strode along the road, small clouds of smoke billowing from his mouth, a pipe that had been a gift from the old man clenched between his teeth. With his final transformation so close, his hormones had been going crazy, leaving alternately angry, horny, depressed and hyper. Alduin had advised him to get a few leaves of dragon tongue and smoke it with a bit of the Hokage's special tobacco, and it had done well in making his mood level out. It was not helped, however, by the constant flirting he had to deal with. Satsu, being his responsibility, had come along and insisted on staying in his tent, citing herself as his bodyguard. That had not gone over well with the others. Honestly, he just wanted to sleep most nights. By that token, Hinata and Hanabi had taken to waiting for an argument to break out before sneaking into his tent and cuddling with him through the night. "Naruto!" A soft voice broke through his reverie. He turned and smiled apologetically at Yoshino Nar, who was sitting on the cart he was walking next to. "Sorry, Nara-san, I was just thinking." The former Kunoichi pouted and crossed her arms. "Naruto, I told you to call me Yoshino-chan. The least you can do is respect that." "Alright, Yoshino-chan," he replied, puffing away. "Did you want to talk to me about something?" She smiled at the name. "Yes. What is it that you're smoking? It smells intriguing." "It is. It's a mixture of dragon tongue and the Hokage's special tobacco. It's supposed to help calm me down and relax," Naruto explained, blowing a smoke ring. The Nara matriarch fell silent. "Can I try it?" she finally asked, looking abashed. Naruto cocked an eyebrow at woman, but handed over the pipe, albeit tentatively. He watched as the woman inhaled the fragrant cinnamon mint smoke with her eyes closed. She breathed out slowly, eyes fixed on some invisible point in the sky. "Orange-white orchid and the Hokage's special tobacco. It relaxes you, you say? Funny, it's giving me energy. I feel awakened." She stiffened, her eyes going wide. "I'm awakened. So awakened. So awakened, you don't even know." Naruto quickly flicked an orb of calming green energy at the suddenly hyper woman, snatching the pipe away quickly. Ishino blinked at the sudden absence of energy. "What was that?" she asked. The dragon human created a similar bowl in his hand. "Calming spell. Should have figured it would react differently with you, sorry about that." She shook her head and smiled at him. "No need to apologize, Naruto-kun, I don't mind. Though I might be interested in getting some for my son and husband." Naruto shook his head and chuckled at the thought of Shikamaru and his dad running around, bouncing off the walls, because they were so hyper. That would hilarious. Ishino sighed and chuckled. "It would at least make my sex life better." The gray-haired shinobi puffed his pipe, silenced by the sudden comment. "I didn't need to know that, Yoshino-chan," he replied, giving her a dry look. "Oh?" She cocked an eyebrow at him. "You don't want to hear about my sex life, or rather, lack of one." His face became deadpan. "No. You are the mom of one of my acquaintances, and also married. Am I unattractive?" she asked with a sad pout and a small sniff. "It's because I'm plain, isn't it?" Naruto's eye twitched. On one hand, he knew she was manipulating him. On the other, he didn't want to offend the matriarch of the Nar. "You're very pretty, Yoshino-chan, but you are still married." I don't want to be homewrecker. Ishino leaned over and began to whisper in his ear. Naruto, do you see my son up ahead? His eyes focused on the sleeping form of Shikamaru, who was napping in the back of a cart. Yes. And you know he's 13, right? At his nod, she continued. I haven't had sex in 12 years, and it's not for a lack of trying. Every time I try, Shikaku just lays there like a log with a branch sticking up. He falls asleep before I can even get started and I never get to finish. You know how stressed 12 years of sexual frustration makes you. Tell it, sister. Ember cheered inside his head. Sighing to himself, Naruto grudgingly admitted that Yoshino had a point, as much as he didn't like it. Alright, I get it, you're unhappy with your marriage. Then why not get a divorce? The Nara matriarch sighed, and slumped a bit in her seat. As much as I don't enjoy my sex life, I love my son, and I don't want him to go through that. If I did divorce, I wouldn't be able to see him anymore as I wouldn't be part of the clan. Unless I came out of retirement and became a Kunoichi again. Silence fell between, broken only by the clops of hooves and the creaking of wheels. Sorry about that, Naruto said, tucking his hands in his pockets. Not your fault, she replied. Let's change the subject. What's this I've heard about potions? After a day of walking and chatting with a woman very interested in the knowledge Naruto had about herbs, and the potions that could be made with them, night had fallen and camp had been made. With a full belly, Naruto sighed as the girls started arguing again. Ladies, he interjected before they could gather any steam. Stop fighting. I know tensions are high, because of where we are going, but you need to calm down. Satsu, stop antagonizing them. I'll ask Kakashi to take you with the Jonin if we come across a bandit encampment, alright. The silver-haired Daedra worshipper nodded, crossed her arms, pouting at the loss of her fun. Naruto stood and brushed the dust from his pants. I'm going to bed, alone, he said, looking meaningfully at the Hyuga twins. Good night, everybody. The Ni sisters stood and kissed his cheeks, before he entered his tent, and zipped it shut. He sighed and divested himself of his jacket, pausing when he realized that he wasn't alone in his tent. Ishino stood next to his role wearing a gray sleeping yukata. She put a finger to her lips and shushed him, before slapping a seal on the side of his tent and flaring her chakra. There, now nobody will hear us. Hear us? Naruto asked, slightly confused by her appearance. She smirked at him, and pulled the hairband binding her brown hair into a bun, letting the short curls fall around her shoulders. Well, I don't think you want anyone hearing me scream as I get introduced here, dragon, do we? They might think something untoward is going on. Before he could reply, she shrugged her shoulders, dropping the silk garment to pull on the floor, revealing what she wore underneath. Black stockings clung to her legs like a second skin, held up by a garter belt that dug into her well-rounded hips. Black lacy panties that were low and thin hid nothing from his hungry gaze, and neither did the transparent black bra that was a size too small. Her two moderately sized breasts pushed together invitingly. Sorry, Shikamaru, Naruto thought to himself, letting his eyes wander up and down the view presented to him by the Nara matriarch. But I am so fucking your mother. Ishino placed her hands on her hips and cocked her head to the side, a sultry smile playing about her lips. Well, what do you think? Naruto smirked back, his hormones taking control. Why, Mrs. Nara, are you trying to seduce me? Instead of answering immediately, she strutted over to him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and pushed their lips together, her tongue striking out to tangle with his while one leg went around his waist and meshed their bodies, letting the older woman feel the effects her outfit had on the genin. She pulled back and licked her swelling lips. Not just trying, from what I can feel. Naruto bent his head and licked along her jaw with his long and rough tongue to nibble on her earlobe with his sharp teeth. Oh, I'll make you feel. He whispered, a slight growl in his tone causing shivers to travel down Ishino's spine. His clawed fingers went to the clasp on her bra, but she quickly stopped his arm and gave him a smoky look. Not just yet, you beast, she murmured, running her hands up the sides of his torso. The Nara matriarch swiftly dropped to her knees, dragging her hands down with his pants along the way. His arousal sprang from the confines it had been imprisoned in like she expected, quickly catching it in her mouth and lavishing the tip with attention, her hands holding his arms away from her head. She slowly bobbed forward, taking in more and more of his length, little by little. He hit the back of her throat, and she quickly withdrew, coughing. Sorry, Yoshino looked up at him with a rueful half-smile on her face. I haven't had much practice, as you can tell. He grinned down at her as she lightly stroked him. Take your time. We have all night. She licked her lips and planted her hands on his thighs, before engulfing him in her warm mouth as he threaded his hands through her hair. When he reached the back of her throat, she paused to suck in a breath, before pushing him deeper, ignoring her gag reflex and reveling in the way Naruto groaned and gripped her hair. Ishino stopped with her nose resting against his pelvis, and simply waited for her neck to relax, closing her eyes and feeling the echoing pulse from the length of hot arousal in her head. Naruto threw his head back as she gulped, her throat contracting around him pleasurably. She withdrew and descended again with increasing speed until the tightening of his muscles under her hands warned her of the impending eruption. Quickly, she released him from her mouth and pushed him down, crawling between his legs to lightly stroke him, keeping him on edge, but not bringing him over. I've always wanted to try this, Yoshino commented, grabbing his length and positioning it under her breasts, before lowering herself down, encasing his arousal in soft skin. His tip emerged from the top of her cleavage, and she smothered it with her lips, bobbing her upper half up and down in time with her suction. Naruto panted and groaned out, Yoshino, I'm nearly there. She looked up at him with his arousal in her mouth, her dark eyes glittering with lust, and sucked harder. In return, he released, letting loose a stream of his seed into her mouth, which she drank with enthusiasm, a few drops spilling from her lips to drip on her breasts. Yoshino withdrew, pulling his still hard length from her cleavage, and panted, scooping up the remainder and licking from her fingers. It's so hot, she said with wonderment in her voice. I don't remember it being hot. Naruto seized her by the elbows, and pulled her up to meet her lips briefly, before turning his attention to her neck. As he kissed and licked at the soft skin of her throat, his hands moved to the clasp of her bra, and swiftly unclipped then discarded the garment, freeing her breasts from their lacy confines. He shifted and rolled over, placing Yoshino on her back, and slid down to focus on her chest. His tongue emerged to flick a hardened nipple before drawing it into his mouth, while his hand went to the other unoccupied breast to cup and massage it. Childbirth was evident, though faded from the years, and while they sagged just a bit, they were round and full, rising and falling invitingly as she breathed quickly, the pleasure causing the air in her lungs to leave with every moan. Naruto kissed both nipples and moved down, pressing his lips onto her stomach, softened from retirement, but still toned from a lifetime of training, pausing to playfully tug on the onyx piercing in her navel, before reaching her panty-clad core dripping with arousal. He gently stroked her lips through the thin covering, watching with a smirk as her back arched, and she groaned loudly. A finger pulled on the edge and her panties ripped away easily. Yoshino looked down at him, sweat and color on her cheeks. Disposable panties. Didn't want to take the stockings off. Naruto nodded and kissed her lips, parting the outer folds with his fingers to probe the inners with his long tongue, the rough muscle coiling and stroking inside of her like nothing else, dragging along her walls, and plumbing her depths. One hand gripped the roll underneath her, while the other grabbed his hair and clenched, a keening wail echoing from Naru Matriarch's mouth as her orgasm crashed over her like a tidal wave. The man between her legs didn't let up, licking and kissing and making her experience pleasure she had never felt before, wave after wave of bliss storming through her. When he finally let up, his chin dripping with the juice of her orgasm, she slumped onto the roll, sweat running in rivulets down her body, breasts bouncing as her chest heaved, while she sucked in lungfuls of air. Oh gods, honey, that was amazing. Yoshino mumbled, lying limply while one of her hands patted around the bed. Finding what she was looking for, she uncorked a green vial, and tipped the contents back, blinking at the sudden rush of energy. A smile curled her lips as she leaned on her elbows and peered down at Naruto, crooking a finger to beckon him up. He crawled forward, and rolled over when she pushed on his shoulder, straddling him with his length pressing against her stomach. Now, to the main event. She whispered, mostly to herself, raising her hips and scooting a bit, so that his tip barely parted her swollen and weeping folds. Slowly, so slowly, she descended, fingers clenching, nails scraping against his skin as she was stretched and filled in ways she had never experienced previously, almost uncomfortably. Yoshino's eyes were tightly shut as electricity coursed up and down her body, holding in her breath, while the discomfort faded, and was replaced with pleasure. She exhaled harshly, and pulled up before dropping down, a moan squeezing through her teeth as she bounced on his lap. Naruto grabbed her hips and helped her move, faster and faster, until their skin smacked together loudly, echoing inside the enclosed space of the tent. The Naru matriarch threw her head back as her lover began to push up, meeting her halfway and reaching even deeper inside of her. She started to chant under her breath, gaining volume until she was crying out, yes, yes, yes. Naruto grunted and pulled her hips down as the coil inside him broke, and his orgasm washed over him, spraying his seed deep inside of the older woman on top of him. Yoshino screamed, her voice cracking from the pressure. Hot. Gods, it's so hot. Her back arched as pleasure rushed through her, sapping her energy and at the same time making her hungry for more. Once it ended for her, she slumped over on Naruto's chest, breathing deeply into sleep. Naruto gently pulled out, and set her on her side, spooning against her back, his eyes beginning to close. He was awoken by the pop of the cork, as Yoshino downed another stamina potion and grabbed his face, pressing her lips to his and feeding him with her tongue. What makes you think we are anywhere near done, my dragon? She asked in a dangerously sultry voice. She manhandled him on top of her, dug her fingers deep into the dirt, locked her legs around his waist, trapping his arousal deep inside of her, looked him in the eyes and growled out 2 words, fuck me. The dragon hybrid narrowed his eyes and thrust roughly, spearing into her core and pushing her back into the cushions of his bedroll. He set a blistering pace, slamming into her, and quickly pulling out to plunge back in, Yoshino spewing encouragement and expletives at an equal rate as he did his best to create a detailed imprint of her back in the ground. Naruto woke suddenly, unaware that he had fallen asleep. Regular breaths of warm air brushing over his pectorals made him aware of the head of brown hair resting on his chest, where Yoshino Nara slept peacefully, hair tangled and a satisfied smile on her face. Her breath hitched and she awoke, turning to look up at him. "Hey there," she murmured softly, lightly kissing his muscles. "What a night," he said in reply, stroking her back. His mind flashed back to the 4 other times they had sex before finally falling into exhaustion. Unconsciously, his blanket began to tend as arousal became known to him again. He was drawn from his memories as Yoshino grabbed a hold of his length and began to stroke. "Ooh, breakfast, just for me. You shouldn't have." And slipped underneath the covers to start the morning. After he spent himself in her mouth and once more inside her core, the Nara matriarch made to stand and failed, falling back down on top of Naruto. They looked at each other and began to laugh at the silliness of the situation. At one point, she had growled at him to make it, so she couldn't walk the next day, and he had delivered. The hybrid wrapped an arm around her, and channeled a healing spell, sighing in relief as the soreness began to fade. Yoshino managed to stand and wrap her yukata around herself, then turned to Naruto and spoke. "We only worked through 3 years of stress, honey. Still 9 more to go." She winked lasciviously, and limped from the tent, not needing to sway her hips to draw his attention to her ear. As the flap closed, Naruto sat in silence, before lifting both arms in the air as triumphant music played in his head, expression unchanging. In his mindscape, the black dragon, that was his father figure, cried a few tears of pride and joy for his son, while the other inhabitants both did their best to ignore the music. The weeks passed, and as the days changed, so did the scenery. Thick forests made way for plains with tall grass, as far as the eye could see, which gave way to scrublands dotted with shrubs and rocks, which then morphed into rocky lands interrupted by the occasional coniferous tree. That then became mountains that pierced the clouds and valleys that were filled with snow. As the convoy drew closer to Kumagakure, Samui and Yujiro began to get tense and irritable, spending many a night with their betrothed in his tent, sleeping fitfully. Naruto was walking next to the led cart, whistling to himself when the gates of Kumo came into view. A silent signal went through every ninja and they all stiffened, straightening hidey-eyed, brushing dust from their clothes and tightening the straps to their weapon pouches. Michiko stared at the gates bearing the clouds, her yellow eyes narrowed as she flipped a black shuriken in one hand, while Hanabi made sure her boots were tight, and Sakura and Hinata pulled her gloves up. Lightning cracked and thunder clapped as bright light flashed over the gate, fading to reveal the Raikage standing atop the arch, his arms folded over his muscled chest, blue and white coat flapping in the wind as he gazed seriously down at them from the shadow cast by his hat of station. Naruto glanced at his 2 fiancés in worry, only to find identical expressions of deadpan disbelief. "How much do you want to bet he practiced that?" he heard Samui whisper to her sister. "Never take a sucker's bet," she replied dryly. Naruto snorted quietly, and felt his lips twitch, looking up at the muscled man posing on the gate. The Raikage stepped from the platform and dropped to the ground, cracking the rock under his weight, while looking completely serious. The Jonin stepped forward and bowed slightly, keeping their eyes fixed on the Tower of Power in front of them. He nodded back, and pushed open the heavy wooden gates with one hand. "Welcome to Kumagakure," he boomed thunderously. "The exams begin in 1 day, and fighting beforehand is not allowed. Any who do so will be punished. Well, you here, you are welcome to peruse the shops at your leisure, and take in the culture and atmosphere of my village." I nodded again. "Once more, welcome to Kumo." And then he vanished in a flash of lightning. The caravan wheeled into the village with the merchants splitting off from the ninja, to set up shop and sell their wares, and the ninjas separated to explore the village hidden in the clouds. Most buildings were tall and rectangular, with lightning rods spaced evenly on the rooftops to catch energy produced from the frequent thunderstorms that gave the country its name. Most impressive of all was the Raikage Tower. It towered over the other buildings around it with 3 lightning rods placed on the top, forming the shape of the kanji yama. As Team Yugao looked through the shops, with Yugao and Naruto taking in the scenery with new eyes, and the Ni sisters with familiar ones, a strike member, the Kumo equivalent of Anbu, appeared next to them wearing a mask with thin blue lighting bolts on the cheeks. "The Raikage requests your presence in his office, Konoha-san." The team traded glances, before following the masked man through the streets, and into the Raikage Tower. He led them to the top floor, and left them with a bow at the desk of the Raikage's secretary, a beautiful woman with matcha skin, dark green eyes and silver hair pulled into a loose bun on the back of her head. She looked over the team, focusing on Samui and Yujiro, with a lingering gaze on Naruto. She smiled slightly and stood from her desk, revealing the extent of the green kimono she wore, which reached mid-thigh, and had a deep neckline, that showed some of her cleavage and the fishnet top underneath. "Welcome back to Kumagakure, Samui-chan, Yujiro-chan," she greeted with a short bow. "It's good to see you again." Samui smiled at the woman, as did her sister. "It's nice to see you too, Mabui." Mabui turned her eyes to the other Konoha ninja, and bowed as well. "Welcome to Kumo, I am the Raikage's secretary, Mabui." Naruto stuck his hand out to shake, clasping the smaller woman's hand in his larger, clawed limb. "Nice to finally meet you." Samui and Yujiro have told me a lot about you. The serious woman smiled at the sisters. Good things, I hope. He nodded with smile, and kissed her knuckles. Very good things. The secretary colored slightly, and bade them to follow her into the office. The Raikage, sat at his desk, hands folded with his hat in front of him. His dark eyes followed them as they walked in front of his desk and Mabu left. Once the door was closed, he looked to the two blondes. My daughters, it is good to see you back home. He greeted with a soft voice. Samui stiffened, visage growing cold, while Yujiro scowled lightly. This isn't our home anymore, father. The older of the two stated. But it is good to see you again. The younger finished. Ei's face fell, before he looked at the gray-haired shinobi standing next to them. Naruto Uzumaki. The Konoha no Kakishin. Are you taking care of my girls? Naruto looked down at the man and cocked an eyebrow. We take care of each other. He stated simply. He narrowed his eyes on the hybrid and nodded. Good answer. If you had said anything otherwise, you would have found yourself flying across Kumo from my fist. The hybrid's face became unimpressed. Aha. You doubting my strength, boy? The Raikage shot back. No? Naruto replied unconvincingly. He stood from his desk, caught momentarily off guard, when the realization hit that Genin in front of him was actually taller than the 6.5-foot lightning shadow at 7 feet 8 inches. He put forth his hand to shake, and began to apply pressure, when the Genin grabbed his hand. The two men narrowed their eyes on each other, subtly trying to break the other man's fingers. Then subtlety was thrown out the window when the Raikage's arm began to spark and screech, as blue lightning crackled around the limb, and Naruto's arm blackened, growing scales and talons in response. When either flinched, they withdrew their hands, nodding to the other with a little respect. Now, if you'll excuse me, I would like to talk to my daughters alone. I said evenly, sitting back in his chair. Yugao and Naruto nodded and turned to leave. The shinobi patted Samui on the shoulder, and gave the sisters a reassuring look, then left them to talk with their father. The next day came with a note attached to every team's door, giving them the location of the first exam, room 322, Kumo Shinobi Academy. After their chat with the Raikage, the Ni sisters had come back relaxed and in a better mood, and Naruto was happy for them. His parents were dead, and while he knew why the tension between the leader of Kumo and his daughters was present, he was glad they had managed to work something out. The physical distance between them was bad enough, the emotional one would only hurt them in the long run. As Team Yugao, absent the sensei, walked to the academy, Naruto glanced at his teammates. With her tight pants, light metal shin guards, sleeveless, light green leather armor, fingerless leather gloves and bracers, her weapon pouch. Tanto and cold face made Samui the very definition of a femme fatale. Yujiro was much the same, forgoing a blade for another satchel of weapons and tools, along with a belt that held 2 small scrolls and a belt buckle, imprinted with a paw print lightly padded purple top and light leather boots. Naruto wished they would wear more armor, but he also understood the fact that it would weigh them down when speed was the key to most battles. He understood that they could take care of themselves, but the protective fiancé part of him would also rather that they didn't die when he could do something about it. To that effect, he forged a pair of simple silver amulets enchanted with wards that would spring up if their lives were in immediate jeopardy. The armor also served intimidation purposes, as did the Daedra bastard sword on his back. The academy wasn't very tall, only 5 stories, though it was wide, with the kanji ninja painted on the front. A few other ninja loitered around the doors, either waiting for their teammates, or just passing the time until the first exam. They passed through the doors and ascended the steps, Naruto letting the sisters take the lead as they had learned in these halls, and therefore knew the way. Not as though it would be hard to find a room on the 3rd floor, the nostalgia in their eyes was reason enough to drop back a step. As room 322 came into view, so did the person leaning next to it, their sensei. She glanced up as they approached and stepped forward to meet them. I wouldn't ask, if you want to rethink this, she commented. I know you won't. However, I do want you to know that I believe in you, and I know you'll do great. Just stick together, watch each other's backs, and you'll be fine. Naruto, Samui and Yujiro looked to each other and nodded firmly, ready for the challenge ahead. Their sensei vanished in a puff of smoke and they walked through the doors, into a classroom stuffed full of people. The room was more of a lecture hall, with descending seats and a stage area for a speaker. Looking over the room, Naruto could spot a few familiar faces of other Konoha genin scattered around the room, and 3 times as many unfamiliar faces of genin from other countries. Naruto Uzumaki. The quiet raspy voice called, making the hybrid turn to face the speaker. The past several months had been kind to Sabakugarin. With sleep not being something to fear any longer, her body had a chance to catch up. She had grown taller, if only by a few inches, and her form had filled out, no longer childlike and more girlish, with rounded hips and budding breasts, and the markings around her eyes had faded, drawing attention to her seafoam eyes and the kind glimmer therein. The gourd on her back was made of white sand, and was strapped to her back via a crimson sash that crossed over the pure white breastplate that covered her chest, the remnants of shikaku now used as armor. Under the small plate she wore a dark red robe with the hood down, the sleeves rolled up and slits cut up the sides for easy movement. A dark brown belt with her hideout as the buckle held up tight pants that ended in leather boots that reached her knees, and a white flask that had served to free her hung from her neck as a pendant. Naruto smiled and strode over to the red-haired girl and her siblings. Garen, it's good to see you again, especially given the way I left. He nodded in greeting to Temari and Kankuro. Temari, clowny. The chibi Jinchuriki crossed her arms over her chest and returned the smile. I had a feeling you would be here today. We should take some time to catch up later. I would like that. He replied as the door opened and admitted more genin, including Team 10 and 7, who joined them quickly. I'm telling you Shikamaru, you're just looking for a problem. Ino told her childhood friend. The brunette slacker shook his head. And I told you, my mom is never this relaxed. Never. I think she's taking drugs, I just don't know how to confront her. On one hand, mom being relaxed is good, she's less troublesome. On the other hand, drugs are bad. If they're just making her relax, they can't be bad drugs, can they? Chaoji asked around a mouthful of chips. Shikamaru sighed and scratched his ponytail. It's the principle of the thing, Chaoji. Naruto crossed one arm over his chest and planted his elbow in his hand, covering his mouth and trying not to smile. The door was kicked open by Kiba, who marched up to the group and announced, "What's up, bitches?" Hinata narrowed her eyes and smacked him in the back of the head. What did I say about keeping clan slang inside the clan? He rubbed the back of his skull and mumbled, "Keep it inside the clan." Someone sidled up to the gathering and spoke up. You know, being so loud will draw attention to yourselves. Naruto looked down and saw an older teen with white hair and round glasses looking at the group with a knowing smirk. And you are? The teen adjusted his glasses. Kabuto Yakushi, one of your fellow genin. Satsuki looked him up and down before crossing her arms. Aren't you a little old to be a genin? He chuckled and shook his head. One could say that, but the exams are nothing to scoff at. I've been to 7, and they never get any easier. Kiba scoffed. 7? Maybe you just suck. Perhaps. Or perhaps the challenges you will face here are beyond your capabilities. Naruto stopped listening to the conversation as an odd scent filtered into his nose. Clean metal, sanitizing chemicals and reptiles, what kind of combination is that? He wondered to himself. And I have all the information on the genin here. Just ask and I'll show you. Kabuto announced, pulling a deck of blank white cards from his pouch. The large hand grabbed his arm and forced the appendage back down. How about you don't give away information around people we'll be facing shortly? Naruto stated firmly, meaningfully glancing around at the other genin listening closely. Kabuto blushed in embarrassment. Right, sorry. While his head was turned, something caught the corner of his eye, and Naruto looked to the side as someone rushed at them, rage boiling in his veins at the sight of 3 familiar ninja. The spiky-haired boy with Shy on his shirt, the one who blew him off a cliff into Hersine's hunting grounds. The one wrapped in bandages who declared him trash and ordered the other to blow him off a cliff. And the girl who seemed to be against it. The girl would be the only one he wouldn't kill, unless she gave him a reason. Unknown to Naruto, his anger was known to Kabuto, who went white and fell to his knees, frantically scrabbling at Naruto's hand that was painfully squeezing his arm, making the bone creak in distress. At the sight of crimson eyes glaring at them, promising agony, the team from Oto stopped as visions of their deaths flashed before their eyes. Naruto shook his head and let go of Kabuto's arm with a muttered apology as clouds of smoke burst around the edge of the room, fading away to reveal Kumo Chunin looking at them. Alright, everybody calm down. The Jonin at the front ordered, arms crossed over his chest. You are all here to take the Chunin exams, I'm led to believe. At their nods, he snapped his fingers and the Chunin planted a pair of boxes on 2 desks. Very well. Calmly take a number from these boxes and find your seats, then the first exam will begin. After everyone was seated, he formed a hand seal and released a wave of chakra. I am K, your proctor for the first exam. He snorted, the golden nose ring in his left nostril shaking as he did. The sign I just made activated the seals placed on the bottom of your seats. What do these seals do, you ask calmly. He snapped his fingers again, making the Chunin pass out sheets of paper and a pencil. They adhere arrears to your seats, so you can't leave without giving up or failing. The couple genin attempted to stand, but were shocked and slumped back down. Trying to leave will shock you, as you saw. Kei said with a smirk. On these papers, you will find a quiz on general knowledge a Chunin level ninja should have. Here are the rules. You have 3 chances. Each time you are caught cheating, you will be shocked, with the intensity going up each time. If get caught 3 times, you will be shocked into unconsciousness, along with your teammates, and you will fail. Teammates traded looks, some angry, others fearful. Kei sat in the chair at the teacher's desk, and leaned back with his feet on the desk. You have 1 hour to complete the test. He flipped open a book and started reading. The scratching of pencils and the rustling of paper was heard for several minutes, until one genin in the back grunted in pain as an electrical shock coursed through his body. The Jonin lounge had a TV connected to several cameras within the examination room, and the Jonin themselves had a prime view of the test. No one really spoke, simply watching the genin write, and occasionally someone would curse as their team was electrocuted into unconsciousness and left to retrieve them. Takashi turned to look at Guy, his eye narrowed. I say, this is a rather shocking turn of events. Guy sat up and looked at his fellow jonin searchingly before a fire lit in his eyes. I find this test to be shocking in nature. I am absolutely shocked at this breach of ethics. I am electrified by the drama unfolding. Kurenai slapped a hand to her face as the two continued to trade puns. Once the hour had passed, a third of the genin had been cleared out. Kei snapped his book closed and stood in front of the classroom once more. To those who remain, congratulations on making it this far. He pulled a coin out of his pouch and placed it on his thumb. And here is the last part of the test. I will flip this coin. If it lands head up, you will all pass. If it lands tail up, you will all fail. If you don't want to take this chance, I will release you from the seal on your seats and you can leave calmly, but you will fail. Any takers? Several genin raised their hands immediately, and were let go then and there. As time passed, half of the room was cleared, until only half of the original genin remained. No more? The proctor asked, looking around the room. When no one made to move, he shrugged. Alright, here we go. He flipped the coin into the air, every eye fixed on the silver spinning disc as it rose into the air, crested the arc, and began to descend. The frantic heartbeats of every genin was nearly audible as the coin headed towards the ground. The moment was lost when Kei reached out and snagged the coin from the air and put it back in his pocket. Congratulations, you have passed the first exam. Silence ruled the classroom before someone stood up from their seat and shouted, "What?" The jonin smirked. Every mission is a gamble. A simple delivery could become an ambush, an easy escort could start a war and all sorts of things. Nothing is certain in the world of ninja, and you staying here calmly is evidence that you accept that. Does that mean you actually are? Maybe. Is it enough to get to the next test? Yes. The door at the top of the room flew open, bouncing off the wall with a loud slam. Alright you poor sons of bitches, I hope you're prepared for the second exam. Having shouted that, the woman standing in the doorway swept an imperious gaze over the gathering of genin. She was tall, easily breaking 6 feet, with chocolate skin, pale blonde hair and dark blue eyes. She wore a kumo jonin jacket shaped into a girdle around her stomach, a belt made of chains around her waist, from which multiple long scraps of cloth fluttered over a pair of shorts. A pair of sandals with shin guards wrapped with chains made up her footwear, while a pair of bracers, also wrapped with chains, were strapped around her wrists, and bandages covered her breasts, leaving her muscled stomach, decorated with multiple tattoos, bare. Follow me to where the second exam will take place. She shouted, waving her arm and walking out of the class. Naruto looked around the room, finding the first proctor and the chunin gone. He met up with his teammates, Yujiro looking slightly frazzled from a shock, and followed after the second proctor who had broken into a jog. They followed her through Kumo, down part of the mountain the village sat on, and into the mouth of a valley that overlooked a wide field that was fenced off. The woman jumped on top of the fence, and looked down at the genin. I am Yutsuki L, the proctor for the second phase of the chunin exams. As for where we are currently at the entrance to the most dangerous training ground in Kumo. Training ground number 13, the Valley of Blades. Looking behind her, and into the valley, the genin could see why it was called that. Thousands of stalagmites pointed from the ground, sharp edges gleaming in the sunlight as far as the eye could see. Elle grinned at the trepidation on the faces beneath her. This is where the second exam will take place. Before I explain any further, my assistants will pass out these forms. She snapped her fingers and several chunin darted into the crowd, handing out papers. These are simple forms, stating that you and your village won't hold Kumo responsible for your death, that you did this of your own free will and yada shit like that. She shrugged her shoulders, and rolled her neck. Anyway, sign them or you can't continue. There was shuffling and muttering, but in the end, all the forms were signed and passed back. The evil grin on Elle's face was not comforting. You poor bastards have no idea what you are getting into. She muttered clearly, voice carrying over the crowd. So, here is what's going to happen. The proctor held up a pair of amulets, one white and the other black. Every team will get one of these, either the black one or the white one. Your task is to get both, because you can't pass the test without them. There are 2 reasons for this, so we eliminate half of you idiots, and so that the remaining half can actually complete the test. She pointed off into the middle of the training ground, towards a dark shape that had dark clouds thrashing around the top. Your objective is to make your way to that, the storm spire, which is surrounded by a powerful lightning storm that never ends, with bolts strong enough to disintegrate a human being. The only thing that can get through it unharmed is the Reikage, and a person bearing these amulets, which will protect your entire team, if you remain in contact with them. Reach the spire with your whole team alive within 5 days, and you pass. Elle grinned at the pale faces in the crowd. One team will go into the hut at time, and after we're all spread out and ready, the test will begin. The genin lined up in front of a hut that had cloth draped over the opening and disappeared into it, one team at a time. As they waited, someone came up from behind Samui, and caught her in a surprise hug, yelling, "Ni-chan." Samui reacted like anyone who fights for a living, and drove her foot back and up, right into the crotch of her assailant, who dropped to the ground, whimpering and clutching his bruised man bits. "I told you that was a stupid idea, idiot." A woman shouted loudly, bringing her fist down on the blonde man's head, red hair swaying from the motion. Naruto cocked an eyebrow, looking down at the man who resembled Samui a bit with similar hair. "Who's this?" Samui pinched the bridge of her nose while Yujiro giggled. "He's Atsui." She grumbled in resignation. "He was a kid at the orphanage who decided I was lonely, so he dyed his hair and declared himself my brother to cheer me up. Of course, after he did that, I was adopted, and he would regularly get into trouble by trying to sneak into our home, not wanting to be separated from his Ni-chan." "Not hot," the blonde man moaned, standing on shaky legs. "Not hot at all, Ni-chan. I was just trying to show you my brotherly love." Naruto snorted as the red hat turned on Atsui. "By sneaking up, and grabbing her from behind. You moron." Atsui locked onto the hybrid standing next to his sister. "You," he cried dramatically, pointing in Naruto's face. "You're the evil beast who stole my sister away. You probably did terrible horrible things to her, like take her chastity before she's married." Samui blushed furiously and quickly gut-punched the loud blonde. "Shut up. Don't shout such things so loudly." Carrie looked at the blushing blonde and quickly deduced the reason. "Gods, you really had sex with this guy," she whispered angrily. "I thought you said you wouldn't until you had no choice." Yujiro cocked an eyebrow at her sister with a smile. "Really, Samui? I know we didn't like having our marriages arranged, but we said we would wait until we met the guy." Samui crossed her arms, doing her best to ignore the heat coming from her face. "I was angry, okay. But it doesn't change the fact that yes, I did have relations with Naruto before we were married, but it was my choice. I love him," she declared simply. Naruto wrapped an arm around Samui and kissed her cheek with a smile. Hearing that warmed his heart like nothing else. "I love you too," he murmured quietly. The blonde looked up at him with wide eyes before burying her face in his side, arms around his chest. Carrie gaped at the display of affection from a woman she only knew as cold and stoic. "And you're alright with this?" Yujiro asked in disbelief. The blonde Jinchuriki shrugged, and put her arm around Naruto as well. "I do get jealous sometimes, but after we nearly came to blows over it, Samui and I swore that we wouldn't let our feelings for the same guy destroy our bond as sisters." Amoy looked at the two blondes hugging the tall man and shook his head. "I'm not even going to comment." "But, cause it's your turn." Al shouted, "Hurry up." The three Kumogenin made their way into the hut, the blonde still crying from his Ni-chan's love. The covering closed and small flash of light shone from the edges before the proctor motioned Team Yugao forward and handed Yujiro a black amulet. They entered the small room and stood on an upraised platform as Mabui made a hand sign in front of them. Crackling filled the air and light flashed, making them blink as they found themselves standing in front of gate leading into the training ground. The speaker buzzed as it turned on, and El's voice came through. "Alright you little bastards, the second exam begins now." The gate slid open and they dashed inside, heading towards the black spire in the distance. Itsuki L stood on the gate watching the little black dots representing the Genin runoff. She turned to look at the sky and smiled as full gray clouds slowly rolled over the valley, sealing it like the lid of a coffin. "We timed this perfectly," she muttered to herself, crossing her arms over her chest as small white flakes began to descend from the sky. The first blizzard of the season. Man versus nature. Elle licked her lips and thought of the tallest Genin there, the one with the large, brutal sword and the multitude of tattoos. He's aesthetically pleasing to look at, tall, muscled and tattooed. Just my type, she thought with a grin. I haven't gotten laid in 3 years, fucking pussy's afraid of a woman who's taller than they are. I could use a wild night. Who? Now I can't wait. She shouted to the skies, laughing to herself as the wind picked up and snow began to pelt her form. In his office, the Raikage propped his chin on his fingers, his mind on the conversation he had last night with his 2 daughters. Looking over them made his heart ache. They had grown, so much only a little less than a year, and it was because of his father that he didn't get to see it. A glance at the picture next to his own on the wall of the Raikage, the glass cracked from when he had thrown it across the room. Damn you, old man. Your greed for bloodlines made me give up my daughters, one for the Hyuga incident, and the other for when you tried to kidnap the last Uzumaki, who was also the current Kyuubi Jinchuriki. A thought furiously to himself, lightning unconsciously flaring around his form, before it faded as his temper waned. At least my daughters are happy with the man they are to be wed to. And now I can't even fantasize about killing the guy without also imagining the heartbreak it would put them through. The Raikage stood from his desk, and grabbed a scroll, quickly scribbling something down and gesturing for a strike member. Here, he handed it to the masked woman. Take this to the Thunder Priest's temple, ask for the head priest and deliver this to him. Understood. The strike member nodded once, and vanished in a flash of lightning, and Ace slumped down into his chair. I'll miss so much once this over, he thought sadly, but I am not missing my daughter's weddings. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.